The Name 3, Part 2 of 4. Perhaps the subject of the Enunciation always has another leg to stand on. What I have moreover articulated is that this little n, graspable here in expletive form, it's here that we must acknowledge in it, in a correctly speaking exemplary case, the thing it stands on. And equally, this does not mean, of course, that we must acknowledge what it stands on exclusively within this exceptional phenomena. The way language is used is going to allow me to highlight before you, in a very banal way, not so much Pichon's distinction. In truth, I don't think it is sustainable right up to its descriptive limits. Phenomenologically, it depends on the idea, inadmissible for us, that the flow of thinking can be fragmented. Nevertheless, you can see that with this linguistic approach that immediately allows you to appreciate the originality of the case where you can in current usage of the language, it has not always been thus. In old-fashioned times, the form I am going to formulate before you now was the more commonly used one. In all languages, an evolution can be noticed with forms of negation, like a glissement, a slippage that linguists try to outline. The direction in which this glissement tends, perhaps I will tell you the overall trend in a minute, it is expressed in what the specialists write. But for the moment, let's take the simple example of what is available to us, very simply in the distinction between the two equally admissible, equally heard, equally expressive, equally common formulations, those of je ne sais, I know not, and je sais pas, don't know. I think you can see straight away the difference between them, the difference in accent. This I know not is not without its mannerism, it is literary. It may still be more valid than young nations, but it is in the same register. These are the two distinct, if not opposing, purviews of Marivaux. What this I know not expresses is essentially something completely different from the other code of expression, the code of dunno, je sais pas. It expresses oscillation, hesitation, doubt even. It's not without reason that I have evoked Marivaux. It is the usual on-stage expression in which hidden wishes can be expressed. Alongside this I know not, we should play with the spelling of je sais pas, dunno in English, with the ambiguity created by my play on words, through the process of assimilation that is undergone due to the fact that it is next to the inaugural S of the verb, the J apostrophe of the je, that becomes an aspirated sh, which thereby becomes voiceless and sibilant. The swallowed n disappears altogether here. The whole phrase ends up resting on the heavy pa, the plosive that ends it. The expression will only take on its accent of a slightly derisory accentuation, perhaps a plebbishness, precisely because of its dissonance with what would otherwise have been expressed. The dunno marks, if I may say so, the hit of something where, completely on the contrary, the subject has just collapsed, flattened, prostrated itself. How did you manage to do that? Someone in authority asks the person responsible after some sad mishap. Dunno. It's a hole, a gap that opens up, at the heart of which what disappears, what is sucked out, is the subject, her himself. But here it no longer appears in its oscillatory movement, on the basis that is granted to it by its original movement, but completely on the contrary in the form of an express statement of ignorance, properly speaking taken on, or rather projected, stated. Something that presents itself as a not being there, projected onto a surface, a plane on which it is recognizable as such. And what we are getting at, on the pathway indicated by these remarks, verifiable in thousands of ways, by all kinds of other examples, is something of which, at the very least, we should retain the idea of it as being double-sided. Is it that this double-sidedness is truly oppositional, as Pichon suggests? As far as the apparatus of negation itself is concerned, can a closer examination allow us to resolve this question? To start with, note that the ne of these two terms seems to undergo here attraction to what could be called the group at the beginning of the phrase, to the extent that it is held on to by, dependent on the form of the pronoun. This head of the pack in French is notable in a range of formulations, such as the je ne le, I won't ... it, or je ne le lui, I won't ... him it. The way these groupings before the verb occur is not without reflecting a profound structural necessity. That the ne happens to create these aggregates, I will say that this here is not the thing that seems to me to be the most remarkable here. What seems to be most remarkable to me is this, that by creating these aggregates, it thereby accentuates what I will call the subjective significantization. In fact, note that it is not by chance that it is at the level of an I know not, of an I cannot, of a certain category, which is that of these verbs in which the subjective position itself is situated, is inscribed as such, from which I have drawn my working example of the isolated ne. There is in fact a whole register of verbs of which the usage is such as to make us remark that their function changes profoundly when they are used in the first, second or third person. If I say I think it is going to rain, je crois qu'il va pleuvoir, this is indistinguishable from, as my announcement that it is going to rain, an act of faith. I think it is going to rain simply connotes the contingent aspect of my foretelling. See how things are modified if I proceed to the other persons of the verb. You think it is going to rain makes much more of an appeal to something, the one I am addressing in myself to. I am interpolating her his testimony. He thinks it is going to rain gives more and more weight to the adhesion of the subject to her his belief. Inserting the ne will always be easy when it is just added to these three pronomial supports of this verb that has a varying function here. From the beginning, with a nuance at the level of the enunciation right up to the énoncé of the subject's position, the weight of the ne will always bring it back to the nuance at the level of the enunciation. I don't believe it is going to rain is even more tied to a suggestive aspect relating to my own disposition. This has absolutely nothing to do with a non-belief, but simply indicates my good humour. I don't think it is going to rain. I don't think it is raining. That means that things don't look that bad to me. In the same way, adding it to the other two forms, besides being something that is going to distinguish two other persons of the verb, the ne will tend to I-ize what it is about. In the other forms, you don't think it is going to rain, he doesn't think it has to rain. It is very much insofar as it's definitely towards the I that they will be drawn, by the fact that it is with the addition of this little negative particle that is inserted into the first part of the phrase in French, tu ne crois pas qu'il va pleuvoir, il ne croit pas qu'il doive pleuvoir. Does that mean that on the opposite side, we have to see the pas as something that, with all brutality, simply connotes the pure and simple fact of privation? This would certainly be what Pichon's analysis suggests, insofar as it groups the examples in this way. It, in fact, has all the appearances of it. In fact, I don't think this is right, for reasons that initially stick with the very origins of the signifiers that it concerns. Surely with the historical genesis of the form in which they were inserted into the language. Originally, je n'y vais pas, I'm not going that way, could be stressed with a comma. Je n'y vais pas un seul pas, if I may say so, meaning I'm not going that way, not a single step, with pas meaning both not and step in French here. Je n'y vois point, même pas d'un point, meaning I do not see it, not one point of it, with the word point both expressing the not in a stronger, more literary form and also being used to mean a point. Je n'y trouve goutte, il n'en reste mie, meaning I can't find a drop of it and there isn't a crumb of it left, phrases in which the pas is not needed because the words for drop and crumb replace it, as functionally equivalent forms of negation when preceded as they are by the ne. it is very much about something that, at its origin, being a long way from connoting a whole or an absence, expresses very much on the contrary a reduction, a vanishing no doubt, but incomplete, leaving behind it the traces of the smallest, most faded mark. In fact, the words, which are easily restored to their positive value, to the extent that they are still in current use with this value, very much receive their negative charge from the slippage that is produced towards them by the function of the ne. And even if the ne is elided, it is very much still on them, this charge that it concerns, in the function that it exercises. If I may say so, there is a kind of reciprocity, let's say between this pas and this ne, that will come to us when we consider what happens when we reverse their order in the énoncé of the phrase. We say, as a logical example, pas un homme qui ne mente, not one man who doesn't lie. It is very much the pas that opens fire here. What I'm trying to indicate, to get you to grasp, is that the pas, when starting the phrase, absolutely does not play the same function that would be attributable to it, according to Pichon's discussion, if it had the function that is expressed in the following phrase. I arrive and I take note that il n'y a ici pas un chat, literally meaning there is no cat here, but used figuratively to mean, wow, this place is empty. Between us, let me highlight for you in passing the illuminating, privileged, even formidable value of the very usage of such a word as pas un chat, not one cat. If we had to catalogue the ways of expressing the negation, I would propose that we put this type of word under the heading as becoming like a support for the negation. They are not at all without constituting their own special category. What part does the cat play in this question? But let's leave that for the moment. Not one man who doesn't lie shows a difference from this bunch of deficients, something which is at a totally different level and that is sufficiently marked by the use of the subjunctive in French. The not one man who doesn't lie is at the same level as what would stimulate, specify all the most discordant forms, to use Pichon's terms, that we would attribute to the expletive ne, from the je crains qu'il ne vienne, I'm afraid that he will come, to the avant qu'il vienne, before he comes, up to the plus petit que je ne le croyais, smaller than I thought, or even il y a longtemps que je ne l'ai vu, it's a long time since I saw him, which pose, let me tell you in passing, all sorts of questions that, for the moment, I have to leave to one side.